She only wanted a little food. He offered something she didn't even know she needed. The world watched and no one expected what came next. On the urban shores of Miami, where the contrast between luxury and inequality seemed to become part of the landscape, Richard Miller lived a predictable routine. At 42, he was a respected businessman in the technology sector, owner of Miller Tech, a company that operated quietly behind the scenes of the digital market, providing security solutions for large corporations. Richard was known for his discretion, his efficiency, and his solitude. In his sophisticated apartment in South Beach, with a view of the Atlantic Ocean, everything had its specific place. The minimalist furniture, the abstract paintings on white walls, even the books organized by color on the dark wooden bookshelf. Nothing in his life was improvised. Nothing escaped his control. His day invariably began at 5:30 in the morning with a run on the beach, followed by a balanced breakfast. At 7:45, his driver Sebastian was already waiting at the entrance to take him to the office in Old Miami. Richard rarely returned home before 9 in the evening, except on Fridays, when he dined at High Tide, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. It was on one of these Friday nights that Richard found himself sitting alone at his usual table, near the window overlooking the sea. High Tide was one of those places where waiters made almost no noise, and the ocean was merely a backdrop for whispered conversations among the Miami elite. The menu didn't display prices, and the clientele preferred it that way. While waiting for his main course, Richard reviewed some emails on his cell phone. There was a merger proposal from a company in New York that would require his attention in the coming days. His fingers slid across the screen, mentally calculating the pros and cons of the deal, when something unusual happened. The approach was silent. A waiter hesitated as he tried to prevent it, but stopped when he realized the intruder was already in front of Richard's table. The girl, frail, with curly hair damp with sweat and eyes fixed on the newly served plate, didn't seem to be more than 10 years old. She wore a faded t-shirt with a cartoon character print and jean shorts that had seen better days. Her bare feet contrasted with the restaurant's marble floor. She didn't extend her hand, didn't cry, didn't beg. She simply said, in a low but determined voice, "Can I have some?" The waiter, Anthony, approached quickly. "Mr. Miller, I'm sorry, I'll ask her to leave immediately." It was at that moment that something imperceptible began to move inside Richard. It wasn't pity, it wasn't impulse. It was almost a primitive reflex, as if a forgotten part of himself had been called back. "Wait," he said, raising his hand in a contained gesture. His eyes didn't leave the girl's. "It's not a problem." Without knowing why, he ordered another plate. He offered her a chair. He remained silent as the girl settled in with some suspicion, like a wild animal that accepts food but remains alert. The environment froze around them. Some people looked, others pretended not to see. A waiter from a distance filmed the scene for a few seconds and saved the video on his cell phone without knowing the exact reason. When the second plate arrived, the girl ate calmly, unhurried, without hiding. She used the cutlery with a precision that indicated she had been in environments like this before, or that she had carefully observed how others did it. "What's your name?" asked Richard, after a few minutes of silence. "Emily," she replied, without raising her eyes from the plate. "I'm Richard." "I know," she said to his surprise. "You come here every Friday." Richard raised his eyebrows. "You observe the people who frequent this place?" "I observe everything," replied Emily, raising her eyes for the first time. They were deep brown eyes with an intensity that didn't match her age. "That's how we survive." "And where do you live, Emily?" The girl shrugged, turning her attention back to the plate. "Around." "And your parents?" A longer silence settled between them. Emily finished eating before answering. "My mum got sick, really sick. A neighbor said she went to a hospital in Tampa, but I don't know if it's true." Her voice showed no apparent emotion. "My dad disappeared a long time ago." "And there's no one taking care of you?" "I'm getting by," she replied with a dignity That made Richard feel a tightness in his chest. Richard didn't usually make decisions off script. Every step in his life was meticulously planned, calculated, anticipated. But that night, as rain began to fall outside, forming a water curtain that further isolated the restaurant from the outside world, he found himself doing something completely off script. "It's raining hard," he said, watching the thick drops hitting the glass. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Emily stared at him, suspicious. "Why?" "Because it's raining," he repeated, as if it were the most obvious explanation in the world. "And you shouldn't be on the street in this downpour." "I don't need charity," she said, raising her chin. "I'm not offering charity," replied Richard, surprised by his own sincerity. "I'm offering a roof, just for tonight." Emily hesitated. Her eyes assessed Richard, as if she were making complex calculations. Then she looked at the rain and the streets that were already beginning to flood, as often happened in Miami. "Just for tonight," she finally agreed. Richard paid the bill and asked Sebastian to pick them up. In the car, an impeccably clean black sedan, Emily remained silent, observing the city through the foggy window. Miami at night was a contrast of lights and shadows. The luxury buildings along the beach shone like beacons, while in the less illuminated streets, people ran to shelter from the rain. Arriving at the Atlantic Building, one of the most exclusive on the South Beach shoreline, the doorman, George, couldn't hide his surprise at seeing Richard accompanied by a child. In 15 years working there, he had never seen the businessman bring visitors, much less a street girl. "Good evening, Mr. Miller," he said, opening the automatic gate. His curious eyes briefly rested on Emily, but his professionalism prevented him from asking questions. In the elevator, Emily finally broke the silence. "Do you live alone in this whole building?" Richard almost smiled. "No, the building has several apartments. I live in one of them, on the top floor." "So it's like a castle then, at the top of the tower." This time, Richard really smiled. "I never thought of it that way." When the elevator door opened directly onto the penthouse, Emily couldn't hide her amazement. Richard's apartment occupied the entire floor, with large floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of South Beach. The decor was elegant but impersonal, as if it had come straight out of an architecture magazine. "You can sleep in the guest room," said Richard, leading her down the hallway. "It's never been used, actually." The room, like the rest of the apartment, was impeccable. A queen-size bed with white sheets, a minimalist lamp, a flat-screen TV on the wall, no photos, no personal objects, no life. "The bathroom is there," he indicated, pointing to a door. "There should be clean towels in the cabinet, and—" He hesitated, realizing how unusual the situation was. "You must be needing clean clothes." "These are fine," replied Emily, looking at her own clothes. "For sleeping," insisted Richard. "I'll see if I can find something that might fit." He returned minutes later with a white t-shirt that looked more like a dress on Emily's small body. "It's the best I can offer for now." Emily accepted the garment without saying anything. "We'll talk more tomorrow," said Richard, feeling strangely displaced in his own home. Rest. He closed the door and stood in the hallway for a few seconds, trying to process what had just happened. In less than 2 hours, his meticulously planned routine had been completely altered. There was an unknown child sleeping in his apartment, and the strangest thing of all, he didn't feel bothered by it. That night, before going to sleep, Richard took his cell phone to check his emails one last time, as he did every night. But instead, he opened the browser and typed, "How to help. Children in street situations." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Dawn in South Beach arrived with light invading the apartment through the large windows. Richard woke up at his usual time, 5:30 in the morning, even though it was Saturday. For a few seconds, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling as the events of the previous night returned to his memory. Then he jumped up, put on his robe and walked silently to the guest room. The door was ajar. He peeked inside and saw the bed perfectly made, as if no one had slept there. For a moment he thought it had all been a strange dream. Then he heard a noise coming from the kitchen. Emily was sitting at the counter, swinging her bare feet in the air, eating an apple she had found in the fruit bowl. She was still wearing the white t-shirt he had given her, her curly hair pointing in all directions. "Good morning," she said, not seeming surprised to see him. "Good morning," replied Richard, trying to disguise his relief. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, your bed is too soft, but I got used to it." Richard smiled discreetly as he prepared the coffee maker. "You woke up early." "I always wake up with the sun," replied Emily, taking another bite of the apple. "On the street, it's safer to be awake when it gets light." The naturalness with which she talked about her life on the streets bothered Richard. A child shouldn't talk about survival with such familiarity. "You said your mother is sick. How long has it been since you've seen her?" Emily shrugged. "I don't know exactly. Time on the street is different. Maybe 6 months." "And before that, where did you live?" "In Palmetto Bay near here. We had a small shack, but it was ours." She looked out the window, in the direction of the community that extended not far from there, a stark contrast to the luxury buildings along the beach. "After my mom got sick, I couldn't pay the rent anymore. The owner asked us to leave. And there weren't any relatives who could help. My grandma lived with us, but she got sick too." Emily shook her head. "Everyone gets sick someday." Richard nodded, not knowing what to say. He prepared 2 cups of coffee, adding milk and sugar to one of them, and offered it to the girl. "I've never had coffee like this, Fancy," she commented, holding the cup carefully. "It's not fancy. It's just coffee," replied Richard, sitting next to her at the counter. They remained silent for a few minutes, watching the sea through the window. The waves broke gently on the beach, which was beginning to be occupied by morning joggers and street vendors preparing their stalls. "You run on the beach every day," said Emily, not as a question, but as a statement. Richard looked at her curiously. "How do you know that?" "I already told you. I observe people." She took a sip of coffee. "You always run at the same time with the same blue sneakers, and you always stop at the same kiosk to buy water." "Are you watching me?" asked Richard, surprised. "I observe everyone who seems to have a routine. It's easier to know who can help that way." She looked at him with her serious eyes. Predictable people are safer. The honesty disarmed Richard. There was something in the way Emily spoke, without beating around the bush, without self-pity, that intrigued and bothered him at the same time. "I need to do some shopping today," he said, changing the subject. "You'll need clothes and other things." "You don't need to spend money on me. I already told you I don't want charity." "It's not charity," insisted Richard. "It's necessity. You can't go around wearing this giant t-shirt." Emily looked at the garment she was wearing and gave a half-smile. "It looks like a wedding dress." "Exactly," agreed Richard, surprising himself with his own casualness. He couldn't remember the last time he had smiled so much in the morning. After coffee, he called Sebastian, asking him to pick them up. While they waited, Emily carefully folded the bed where she had slept and organized the bathroom, leaving the towel perfectly aligned on the rack. "You don't need to do that," said Richard, watching her. "I always leave places as I found them. It's the right thing to do when someone helps you." Again, the maturity in the girl's words disconcerted him. At the mall, Emily's presence by his side attracted curious looks. Richard Miller was known in Miami not only as a successful businessman, but also as a confirmed bachelor. Seeing him with a child was at the very least unusual. In the children's store, Emily seemed out of place among the colorful racks. She touched the clothes with her fingertips, as if they were fragile objects that could break. "Choose whatever you want," said Richard. "Anything?" she asked, suspicious. "Anything you like." Emily walked slowly through the store, examining each piece carefully. She ended up choosing simple and practical items: a few t-shirts, 2 shorts, a blue dress, and a pair of sneakers. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw attention. "Just that?" asked Richard, thinking it was too little. "It's more than I've ever had," she replied simply. After shopping, they had lunch in the food court. Emily, now dressed in new, clean clothes, looked like a different child. Her hair had been combed, and a slight sparkle animated her eyes as she watched people passing by. "What do you want to do now?" asked Richard. realizing he had no plans for the rest of the day. Normally, his Saturdays were dedicated to work, or occasionally a tennis game at the club. Emily thought for a moment. Can we go to the beach? I always see the beach from far away, but I never go into the ocean. You've never been in the ocean, asked Richard, incredulous. But you live in Miami. Living nearby doesn't mean being able to go in, she replied, with the wisdom of someone who knew well the invisible barriers of the city. That afternoon, Richard took Emily to the beach. Not to the busy part in front of the hotels, but to a quieter stretch where local families usually gathered. He sat on the sand, watching as the girl ran toward the waves, first with caution, then with growing enthusiasm. "Look, Richard, I'm swimming," she shouted, although she was just jumping over the small waves breaking at the shore. Something inside him warmed at seeing her smile for the first time since they had met. It was a genuine smile, without reservations, the smile of a child who, for a few moments, had forgotten the difficulties of life. Back at the apartment, already in the late afternoon, Emily asked if she could take a shower. Richard showed her how the shower worked and left her to it. Minutes later, he heard her voice calling. "Richard, what does this soap smell like?" He approached the bathroom door. "I think it's lavender. Why?" "It's nice," she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "The hot water is nice too." That night they had dinner at home. Richard wasn't good in the kitchen. He usually ordered food or dined out, but he managed to prepare a simple pasta that Emily declared to be the best of her life. Afterward, they watched a movie on the huge TV in the living room, sitting on the leather sofa that had never before accommodated more than one person. On Sunday, the routine repeated with small variations. Richard realized that he was beginning to get used to Emily's presence. The girl was quiet but observant. She asked questions about everything: how his company worked, why he had so many books he never read, why he lived alone in such a big place. "Never wanted to get married? Have kids?" she asked on Sunday night as they were having dinner. Richard hesitated. "I never had time for that." Everyone has time. They just choose to spend it on different things. Again, the unexpected wisdom in her words left him without a response. On Monday, reality imposed itself. Richard had an important meeting that he couldn't postpone. He didn't know what to do with Emily. "You can leave me here," she said, perceiving his dilemma. "I promise not to touch anything. I can't leave you alone. You're a child. I've been alone many times." "That doesn't mean it's right," replied Richard, picking up the phone. He called his assistant Marianne and postponed the meeting until the afternoon. Then he made another call. "Kyle, it's Richard. I need your help with an unusual situation." Kyle Matthews was more than his lawyer. He was one of the few people Richard considered a friend. He arrived at the apartment an hour later, surprised to find a child sitting comfortably on Richard's sofa, watching cartoons. "You didn't tell me you had a daughter," commented Kyle, confused. "I don't," replied Richard, leading him to the office. "It's a long story." As Richard explained the situation, Kyle alternated expressions of astonishment and concern. "You realize the seriousness of this, don't you?" asked the lawyer, adjusting his glasses. "You can't just take a child off the street and bring her home. There are protocols, laws, child protective services." "I know," sighed Richard, "but what should I have done? Leave her in the rain?" "Of course not. You did the right thing at that moment, but now we need to regularize this situation." Kyle made some notes on his tablet. "I'll check if there are any records of her in the system. You said her name is Emily what?" "I don't know," admitted Richard. "She didn't tell me her last name." At that moment, the office door opened, and Emily appeared. Her eyes went from Richard to Kyle, suspicious. "You're talking about me." It wasn't a question. "Emily, this is Kyle, my lawyer and friend," introduced Richard. "He's here to help us." "Help how?" she asked, crossing her arms. "We need to find a way for you to stay here legally," explained Richard carefully, "so that no one comes to take you away if you don't want to go." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "You want me to stay?" The question caught Richard by surprise. Until that moment, he hadn't consciously thought about the future. He had merely reacted to circumstances, one day at a time, but when directly confronted, he realized that the answer was simple. "Yes," he said. "If you want to, of course." Emily uncrossed her arms, suddenly looking smaller and more vulnerable. "My full name is Emily Wilson. I was born at Memorial Hospital. My mother's name is Jennifer Wilson. I don't know my father's name. I never had documents, just the birth certificate, but I think it stayed in the shack when we left." Kyle noted the information, impressed with the precision of the data. "That will help a lot, Emily. Thank you." Later, when Kyle had already left, promising to start the searches immediately, Richard and Emily sat down to dinner. The silence between them was different now, loaded with unformulated questions. "Why do you want me to stay?" asked Emily finally, placing her fork on the plate. Richard thought for a moment, seeking the most honest answer. "Because you changed. Something in me. In just 3 days, you transformed this apartment into a less empty place." Emily nodded as if the answer made sense. "You also changed something in me." "What?" "You made me believe that there are still good people." That night, when Richard checked his social media before going to sleep, as he occasionally did to monitor his company's digital presence, he noticed something strange. A video was circulating with thousands of shares. A video of him and Emily at the High Tide restaurant, at the exact moment when the girl approached and asked for food. His heart raced. The caption read, "Miami businessman gives full dinner. Tell a street girl, humanity still exists." Richard closed the app, feeling a mixture of discomfort and concern. It wasn't just the exposure that bothered him, although that alone was disturbing for someone as reserved as he was. It was the fact that now his connection with Emily was exposed to the world, and something told him that this would complicate things even more. The week began turbulently for Richard. The restaurant video had spread with frightening speed through social networks, surpassing the borders of Miami and gaining national repercussion. Suddenly, the discreet technology businessman had become a kind of instant celebrity, elevated to the status of a symbol of solidarity in a country hungry for good news. His assistant, Marianne, an efficient woman in her 40s, awaited him at the Militech reception with an expression that mixed concern and curiosity. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, following him to his office. "We have an unusual situation." "The video," concluded Richard, placing his briefcase on the dark wooden desk. "Yes, we've received more than 50 interview requests since last night. Newspapers, magazines, TV shows." She consulted her tablet. "Good Morning America called 3 times this morning." Richard sighed, massaging his temples. "Decline them all." "Are you sure? The PR team thinks it would be a great opportunity for the company. Social responsibility is a valuable asset these days." "I don't want to turn this into a media circus, Marianne, and it's not about marketing for the company. It's something personal." Marianne nodded, respecting the decision, although her eyes revealed the curiosity she didn't dare express in words. After a brief silence, she asked, "And the girl, is she with you?" Richard stared at her for a few seconds before answering, "Yes, for now." "I see," she said, although she clearly didn't. "If you need any help, anything—" "Thank you, Marianne. For now, just keep the journalists away and organize that meeting with the New York investors for Thursday." When she left, Richard spent a few minutes looking out the window of his office, which offered a view of old Miami, with its historic buildings and the Miami River winding between bridges. He thought of Emily, whom he had left in the apartment, with Mrs. Carla, a woman who had worked as a housekeeper for him for years, and who for the first time had been called on a Monday for a domestic emergency. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Kyle. "Have you seen the news?" "I saw the video, if that's what you're asking." "It's not just the video, Richard. It's in all the online newspapers. The businessman and the street girl, the viral solidarity, and so on. You need to prepare yourself. This is going to complicate our plans." "How so?" "Exposure increases scrutiny. Child Protective Services must already be watching. We need to act faster than I thought. Richard felt a knot in his stomach. Did you find anything about her? Yes, I managed to locate the birth record. Emily Wilson, born 10 years and 5 months ago, at Memorial Hospital, as she said. Mother, Jennifer Wilson, 26 years old at the time. Father, not declared. And the mother, any information? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm still checking. There's a Jennifer Wilson who was admitted to Tampa Regional Hospital about 6 months ago with advanced tuberculosis. I'm trying to confirm if it's the same person. The mention of the disease made Richard feel a chill. And how are we going to proceed regarding guardianship? It's complicated, Richard. Without the mother's formal renunciation or a declaration of abandonment issued by the court, we can't move forward with a request for permanent guardianship. For now, I can request temporary guardianship, claiming that you're providing shelter and basic care to a minor in a vulnerable situation. Do that, then, as quickly as possible. I'll prepare the documents today. But Richard, Kyle hesitated. Are you sure about this? It's a huge responsibility. Your life will change completely. My life has already changed, Kyle, the moment that girl walked into the restaurant. After hanging up, Richard tried to focus on work, but his mind kept returning to Emily and the implications of the sudden media exposure. Around noon, he received a message from Mrs. Carla. Emily had a good lunch. We're watching soap operas now. She's very polite. The message, so simple, brought a smile to his face. It was strange how, in such a short time, Emily's presence had become important to him. Not just important, but necessary, as if she filled a void he didn't even know existed. In the afternoon, while participating in a video conference with clients, Richard noticed an unusual movement. In the office, people whispering curious looks in his direction. When the meeting ended, Marianne rushed into his office. Mr. Miller, there are reporters at the reception, many reporters, and photographers. How did they find out where the company is? It's not exactly a secret, sir, she replied with a slight tone of irony. And your name is in the commercial registry associated with this address. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. Is there any exit that isn't through the reception? We can use the emergency staircase that leads to the back parking lot. I'll ask Sebastian to bring the car there. Thank you, Marianne. And please ask security not to let anyone up. I've already taken care of that. When he arrived home, Richard found Emily and Mrs. Carla in the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be a cake. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that for a moment he forgot all the confusion of that day. Richard, exclaimed Emily, with more enthusiasm than he had ever seen in her, we're making chocolate cake. Mrs. Carla said it was your favorite when you were little. And it still is, confirmed Richard, smiling. I came home early today. I noticed, said the girl, turning her attention back to the batter she was stirring with dedication. Did something happen? Richard exchanged a look with Mrs. Carla, who understood the cue. I'll leave you two to talk, said the woman, cleaning her hands on her apron. The cake is almost ready to go in the oven. When they were alone, Richard sat at the kitchen table, indicating for Emily to do the same. The girl obeyed, her attentive eyes studying his expression. Emily, you know what social media is, right? Of course. Instagram, TikTok, those things. We didn't have a cell phone at home, but my friends at school did. Someone filmed us that night at the restaurant, when you approached the table and I offered you food. Emily's eyes widened slightly. And posted it on the internet? Yes, and many people saw it. Thousands of people. Is that bad? She asked, uncertain. Richard chose his words carefully. It's not necessarily bad, but it will bring some complications. People will want to know more about us. Journalists, mainly. They'll want to take pictures? Probably. Emily was silent for a moment, processing the information. And will that bother you in your work? The genuine concern in her question touched Richard. Don't worry about me. I'm more concerned about you, about your exposure. I don't care, she said, shrugging. I've been invisible for a long time. Maybe being seen isn't so bad. The simplicity and depth of the response left Richard speechless. As so many times in the last few days, he was surprised by the girl's maturity. "There's one more thing," he continued after a moment. "My lawyer, Kyle, is preparing a request for temporary guardianship." "What does that mean?" "It means that legally I would be responsible for you, at least until we find your mother or another permanent solution." Emily lowered her eyes, distractedly playing with the wooden spoon she was still holding. "Do you really want that? To have me here?" "I do," replied Richard, with a certainty that he didn't know he had until that moment. "But it's a decision. That doesn't depend on me alone. What do you want, Emily?" She raised her eyes, and Richard saw in them a glimmer of hope mixed with caution. "I want to stay. It's good here." That night, after Emily had gone to sleep, Richard sat on the balcony of his apartment, looking at the city lights and the reflection of the moon on the sea. His phone wouldn't stop receiving notifications, messages from acquaintances, missed calls from journalists who had managed to get his personal number, alerts of mentions on social networks. One message in particular caught his attention. It was from Rebecca, his ex-fiancée with whom he had broken up almost 5 years ago. "I saw the video. I never imagined you in that role. Congratulations on the gesture. If you need to talk, I'm here." Richard contemplated the message for a few minutes without responding to it. His story with Rebecca had ended precisely because he couldn't commit, couldn't imagine himself forming a family. The irony of the current situation didn't escape him. The next day, the news had grown even more. A popular national morning TV show had done a special report on the case, interviewing social service experts and commenting on the issue of street children in the United States. Richard's name was mentioned several times, always with praise for his attitude. Le chantier Militech, the routine was completely altered. Employees who barely exchanged words with Richard now greeted him warmly, as if they had discovered a new facet of the always reserved boss. Marianne had hired additional security to keep journalists away, but that didn't prevent some from getting close enough to shout questions as he entered or left the building. "Mr. Miller, what is your relationship with the girl now? Do you intend to adopt her formally? Have you found her mother?" Richard ignored all the questions, keeping his head down and walking quickly to the car, where Sebastian awaited him with the door open. At the end of the afternoon, Kyle arrived at the office with news. "I filed the request for temporary guardianship," he informed, sitting in front of Richard's desk. "But the judge wants to talk to you and Emily before deciding." "When?" "Tomorrow morning. I managed to get a private hearing to avoid the press." Richard nodded, grateful for his friend's discretion. "Any news about her mother?" Kyle's face became more serious. "Yes, I confirmed that the Jennifer Wilson admitted in Tampa is indeed Emily's mother. The situation isn't good, Richard. She's very debilitated." A heavy silence fell over the room. "Emily needs to know," Richard finally said. "I can't hide this from her." "Are you sure? She's just a child." "A child who has already faced more than many adults. She deserves the truth." That night, after dinner, Richard sat with Emily in the living room. The television was off, and the city shone outside like an upside-down starry sky. "Emily, we found your mother," he said gently. The girl's face lit up. "Where is she? Can I see her?" "She's in a hospital in Tampa, as you had heard." "She's sick?" "Very sick?" asked Emily, her voice diminishing. Richard nodded, unable to soften the truth. "Yes, very sick." Silent tears began to roll down Emily's face. They were the first Richard had seen since he met her. Instinctively, he moved closer and hugged her. The girl, initially rigid with the contact, soon surrendered, burying her face in his chest. "I knew," she whispered, between sobs. "I knew. She was very sick. She coughed so much. I tried to help. I saved money for medicine, but it wasn't enough." "It's not your fault," said Richard, feeling his own heart break with her suffering. "You did what you could." "I want to see her," declared Emily, raising her face marked by tears. "Please, Richard, I need to see my mother." We'll see her, he promised, as soon as possible, but first, we have a hearing tomorrow with the judge for the temporary guardianship request. Remember, it's important that we're there. Emily nodded, wiping away the tears with the back of her hands. And after that, we'll see my mother. Right after. That night was difficult for both of them. Richard remained awake for hours, listening to the occasional sobs coming from Emily's room. Several times he almost got up to go to her, but something held him back, perhaps respect for the pain that he knew was deeply personal. In the morning, they prepared in silence for the hearing. Emily wore the blue dress they had bought at the mall, and Richard noticed how she seemed simultaneously older and younger, her eyes carrying a weight that no child should carry, but her posture revealing a vulnerability that reminded him of her true age. When they were about to leave, the doorbell rang. Richard opened the door, expecting to find Kyle. Instead, he was faced with a middle-aged woman, grey hair and determined expression. "Mr. Miller, I'm Vera Lewis from Child Protective Services. We need to talk about the minor Emily Wilson, who, according to information, is under your care without any legal authorization." Behind Richard, Emily froze, her eyes widening with fear. At that moment, his phone rang. It was Kyle. "Richard, we have a problem. Emily's father has shown up." Judge. Helen Vanderbilt's office was more welcoming than Richard had imagined. Instead of the cold, impersonal environment he expected, he found a room with walls in soft tones, some ornamental plants, and in the corner, a small table with colored pencils and paper, clearly meant for the children who passed through there. Emily sat rigidly next to Richard, her small hands gripping the edge of the chair. On the other side of the room, Vera Lewis, the child welfare officer, was leafing through some documents with a concentrated expression. Kyle, the lawyer, occasionally whispered with Richard, updating him on the situation. "His name is Walter Sanders," explained Kyle discreetly. "He presented documents that prove he's the biological father, although he's not on the birth certificate. He claims he lost contact with Emily and her mother about 5 years ago when mental health problems and chemical dependency forced him to stay away. And now he reappears. Conveniently when the story becomes news," commented Richard with contained bitterness. "He says he saw the video and recognized his daughter," continued Kyle. "He claims he's been rehabilitated for 2 years, with a steady job as a refrigeration technician and stable housing in Coral Gables." Before they could continue the conversation, the door opened and the judge entered, followed by a man of simple appearance, wearing an impeccably ironed dress shirt and jeans. Richard immediately noticed the resemblance. The same intense brown eyes as Emily, the same face shape. Beside him, he felt the girl stiffen even more. "Good morning, everyone," said Judge Vanderbilt, a middle-aged woman with grey hair tied in an elegant bun. "This is an informal hearing to discuss the situation of the minor Emily Wilson. We'll conduct this as calmly as possible, keeping in mind the well-being of the child." She looked directly at Emily with a gentle smile. "Hello, Emily. I'm Judge Vanderbilt. You don't need to be nervous. We're here to help." Emily nodded slightly without saying anything. "Mr. Sanders," continued the judge, turning to the man who remained standing, looking out of place, "you may sit down." Walter obeyed, sitting a few chairs away from Emily, who avoided looking in his direction. "Let's clarify the facts," continued Judge Vanderbilt. "Mr. Miller, you found Emily," she consulted the documents, "about a week ago in a restaurant, and since then she's been under your care, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," replied Richard. "She was alone, it was night, it was raining heavily. I offered temporary shelter, which extended when I realized she had nowhere to go." "And at no point did you seek the competent authorities?" "I hired Mr. Kyle Matthews to start the legal procedures as soon as it became clear that the situation wouldn't be temporary. He filed for temporary guardianship 2 days ago." The judge nodded, turning to Vera Lewis. "Does Child Protective Services have any objection to Mr. Miller's request for temporary guardianship?" The counselor adjusted her glasses before answering. "The service recognizes Mr. Miller's good intention, but we have concerns. First, the lack of previous ties with the child. Second, the absence of experience in raising children. Third, the possibly inadequate environment for the healthy development of a child. Inadequate? Questioned Richard, unable to contain himself. Emily has her own room, proper food, access to education. What could be inadequate? A home is not just about material aspects, Mr. Miller, replied Vera firmly. A child needs emotional stability, routine, consistent parental figures. You are single, work long hours, and until last week had no contact with children. Kyle intervened. If I may, Your Honor, I would like to point out that Mr. Miller has demonstrated extraordinary adaptability. He reorganized his routine, hired appropriate help for the times when he's at work, and established a significant bond with Emily in a very short time. The judge listened attentively before turning to Walter. Mr. Sanders, you claim to be Emily's biological father, although you're not on the certificate. Can you explain your absence from her life in recent years? Walter cleared his throat, visibly nervous. Your Honor, I have no excuses for what I did. I wasn't well. I had problems with alcohol, drugs. I couldn't keep a job, much less take care of a family. He looked briefly at Emily, who still avoided his gaze. Jennifer, Emily's mother, sent me away when the girl was 5 years old. She said I was more of a problem than a help, and she was right. And what has changed now? Asked the judge. I changed, Your Honor. I've been clean for 2 years. I have a steady job, a small but decent apartment in Coral Gables. I attend a support group every week. When I saw Emily's video on the internet, it was as if God was giving me a second chance. During all this time, Emily remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. The judge noticed. Emily, she called with a soft voice, would you like to say something, or would you prefer to talk to me in private? The girl raised her eyes, looking first at Richard, who nodded encouragingly, then at the judge. I can. Speak right here, she said, her voice small but clear. I remember my father. He disappeared when I was little. My mother cried a lot. Sometimes we didn't have anything to eat because he spent all the money on alcohol. She paused, her eyes finally turning to Walter. I waited for you every day. I would sit by the window watching the street thinking you would come back. Then I stopped waiting. The die. Words said with Emily's characteristic frankness fell like stones in the silence of the room. Walter lowered his head, silent tears streaming down his face. And how do you feel living with Mr. Miller? Asked the judge. A small smile appeared on Emily's face. It's good. He's quiet, but he pays attention to what I say. He lets me choose what I want to eat. He took me to the beach. He bought new clothes. And he doesn't yell or slam doors. Would you like to continue living with him? Yes, replied Emily without hesitation. But she hesitated, looking again at Richard. But, encouraged the judge, but I want to see my mother. She's sick, in the hospital. Richard promised to take me. The judge nodded, understanding. And what about your father? How would you feel if he came back into your life? Emily looked at Walter, her eyes revealing a complexity of emotions that her calm voice didn't show. I don't know. It's been a long time. Judge Vanderbilt reflected for a few moments before speaking. This is a delicate situation which requires a careful solution. I'll grant temporary guardianship to Mr. Miller for an initial period of 60 days, considering the bond already established and Emily's expressed wish. She raised her hand, preventing any manifestation. However, I determine supervised visits for Mr. Sanders, initially once a week, on the premises of Child Protective Services, so that father and daughter can gradually re-establish their relationship. I also authorize Emily's visit to her mother, accompanied by Mr. Miller and a representative from Child Protective Services. The decision didn't entirely please anyone, but all recognized its wisdom. After the hearing, while Kyle talked with Vera Lewis about the practical details of the arrangement, Richard and Emily waited in the hallway. Walter approached hesitantly. Can I talk to you for a minute? He asked Richard. Richard looked at Emily, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'll get a glass of water, she said, moving away toward the water fountain at the end of the hallway. Thank you for taking care of her, Walter began when they were alone. I know I have no right to ask anything, but she seems to be doing well with you. "She's an incredible child," replied Richard, surprising himself with the absence of hostility he initially felt. "Strong, intelligent, observant." "She always was," agreed Walter with a sad smile. "Even as a little thing, she already noticed everything. I think she learned to fend for herself too early because of me." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm not going to lie and say I don't want custody of her. I do. She's my daughter, but more than that, I want her to be okay, to be happy. And if it's with you, I'll accept it." The sincerity in the man's voice touched Richard. "I'm not trying to take your place," he said. "I just want to help. Emily needs stability now, but she also needs her family. You, if you're really ready for that." Walter nodded, wiping away a tear. "I'm trying, I swear I'm trying." On the way home, Emily remained silent, looking out the car window. Miami passed by in colorful blurs outside, the immense city indifferent to the personal drama unfolding inside the vehicle. "Are you okay?" Richard asked finally. "I don't know," she replied, honest as always. "It's strange to see my father. After so long, I had almost forgotten his face." "He seems sorry. Everyone seems sorry when it's convenient," said Emily, with a bitterness that sounded out of place in such a young voice. Then, as if regretting the harshness, she added, "But maybe he really has changed. People can change, can't they?" "They can," confirmed Richard, thinking of himself, of how he had changed in just 1 week. With effort and true willingness, people can change. The next day, as promised, they prepared to visit Jennifer at the hospital in Tampa. Vera Lewis, the child welfare officer, would accompany them as per the court order. The journey from Miami to Tampa took about 4 hours, and Richard had hired a driver so that he could give Emily his full attention during the trip. The girl was visibly nervous, repeatedly checking the small bag she was carrying, where she had placed a drawing she had made and a photo that Richard had printed, a selfie of the two of them at the beach, with the sea in the background, perhaps the only moment of genuine joy they had shared until then. What if she doesn't recognize me? Asked Emily suddenly when they were already on the road. "She will," assured Richard. "Mothers always recognize their children, even after so long, especially after so long." Tampa Regional Hospital was a modest structure, but clean and organized. At the reception, Vera Lewis presented the court authorization, and a local INC's social worker led them through the white and aseptic corridors to the ward where Jennifer was hospitalized. "I need to prepare you," said the assistant, stopping before entering the room. "Ms. Wilson is very debilitated. The tuberculosis is in an advanced stage, and although she's responding to treatment, she's still a patient in a delicate state. Please keep the visit brief and avoid topics that might agitate her." Emily grabbed Richard's hand tightly, and he felt the tremor that ran through the small body. He knelt down to be at her eye level. "It's okay to be afraid," he said, softly. "I'm here with you. We can go in together, or I can wait out here if you prefer a moment alone with her." "Together," whispered Emily. "Please." When they entered the room, the first impression was one of shock. Jennifer Wilson was lying in the bed, so thin that the bones of her face seemed to want to break through the pale skin. Her hair, of the same curly texture as Emily's, was thin and lifeless. Her eyes, however, lit up instantly when she saw her daughter. "Emily," she called, her voice almost a whisper. "My daughter, is it really you?" "Mom!" exclaimed Emily, running to the bedside, all hesitations forgotten. She hugged Jennifer carefully, as if afraid she might break. "I looked for you everywhere. The neighbor said you had come to a hospital in Tampa, but she didn't know which one." "I tried to send word," said Jennifer, caressing her daughter's hair with trembling hands. "But when I went back to look for you, the shack was occupied by another family. No one could tell me where you had gone." Tears streamed down the emaciated face. "I thought I had lost you forever." "I was on the street," explained Emily. "Then Richard found me." She turned, pointing to him, who remained discreetly at a distance. "He gave me food, a place to stay. And he helped me find you." Jennifer looked at Richard, her eyes studying him with the same observant intensity he had noticed in Emily. "Thank you," she said simply, "for taking care of my treasure." Richard approached, feeling strangely humble before this fragile woman who, despite everything, emanated a serene dignity. "She's an amazing girl," he said, "very brave and smart." "She always has been," agreed Jennifer, with a weak smile of pride, "since she was little." The visit continued for a few more minutes. Emily showed the drawing she had made, a colourful house with a garden and 3 figures holding hands, her mother, and to Richard's surprise, himself. Jennifer admired the drawing with tears in her eyes, promising to keep it by her bedside. When the nurse came to advise that the visiting time was over, Emily clung to her mother, reluctant to leave. "I'll come back soon," she promised, "and when you get better, we'll be together again." "Of course we will, my love," replied Jennifer, although her eyes, as they met Richard's over her daughter's head, told a different story. In the hallway, while Emily went to the bathroom accompanied by Vera Lewis, the doctor responsible for the case, approached Richard. "Mr. Miller, I'd like to talk to you about Ms. Wilson's condition." Richard nodded, preparing himself for what he already suspected. "The situation is serious," explained the doctor, with the professional frankness that characterized her profession. "The tuberculosis is resistant to several medications and the lungs are already severely compromised. We're doing everything possible, but—" She hesitated, choosing her words. "The expectations are not favorable." "How long?" asked Richard, his voice almost a whisper. "It's hard to say exactly. Weeks, maybe months if we can stabilize the condition. She's fighting bravely, especially now that she's reunited with her daughter." The journey back to Miami was silent. Emily, emotionally exhausted, fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting on Richard's lap. Vera Lewis, sitting in the front seat, occasionally looked back, her once stern face now softened by compassion. "She's grown attached to you," commented the counselor, in a low voice so as not to wake the girl. "And I to her," admitted Richard, surprising himself with the ease of the confession. "That complicates things. Why? Isn't that what everyone wants? For her to have a stable home, someone who cares about her?" Vera sighed. "It's not that simple, Mr. Miller. There's the father, who has legal rights. There's the whole issue of long-term adaptation, and there's—" She hesitated, looking at the sleeping Emily. "The issue of the mother. When the inevitable happens, Emily will need a lot of support. Are you prepared for that?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Richard looked at the girl, sleeping peacefully, her small face finally relaxed after a day of intense emotions. He remembered the first night at the restaurant, the simple request, "Can I have some?" He remembered the drawing she had shown her mother, with him included, as part of the family. "I am," he replied, with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I'm prepared for whatever is necessary." If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The following weeks brought a new routine to Richard's apartment. The place that was once a symbol of solitude and meticulous order now pulsed with a different life. The guest room had definitely transformed into Emily's. Room with walls freshly painted light blue, a color chosen by the girl herself, a bookshelf with children's books, and a few toys that she had accepted after much insistence from Richard. Enrollment in the private school near the apartment had been arranged, and after an assessment that confirmed that, despite the months out of school, Emily had cognitive development above average for her age, she was placed in the 5th grade. Visits to her mother in Tampa became weekly, always on Saturdays, strictly following the schedule established by the judge. Richard had completely reorganized his work schedule. Now he arrived later at the office after dropping Emily off at school and left earlier to pick her up. Twice a week he brought work home, sitting at the dining room table while the girl did her homework beside him. On these nights, Emily occasionally looked up from her notebooks to observe him, a small smile of contentment on her face, as if his simple presence there was a reason for joy. The supervised visits with Walter had also begun, initially tense and loaded with uncomfortable silences. But gradually Emily began to open up to her father. At first they were just direct and practical questions. where he lived now, what kind of work he did, if he had other children. Over time, the conversations deepened. On her fourth visit, she finally asked why he had left. "I was sick, Emily," explained Walter, with the sincerity his daughter deserved. "Not in body, but in mind and heart. When you become dependent on certain things, alcohol, drugs, it's as if you're no longer yourself, as if someone else takes over, someone who only thinks about that, who does anything to get that." "Even abandon your family?" she asked without accusation in her voice, just genuine curiosity. "Even that," he confirmed, his eyes lowered in shame. "I have no excuses, only explanations, and the desire to do things differently now." Richard, who always waited outside the room during the visits, was surprised that day when Vera Lewis called him in, at Emily's request. The girl was sitting between the two men, looking from one to the other, as if evaluating something important. "Richard," she said seriously, "my father invited me to have lunch at his house next Sunday. Vera said it's okay if you agree." Richard felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of jealousy and fear that he hadn't expected. "What do you want to do, Emily?" "I want to go," she replied, direct as always, "but only if you take me and pick me up and—" She hesitated, looking at Walter as if asking permission for something, "and if you stay too, at least this time." The request surprised both Richard and Walter. The biological father, after a moment of reflection, nodded. "It would be good," he said, extending his hand to Richard. "We can talk, get to know each other better, for her sake." That handshake, under Emily's hopeful gaze, marked the beginning of a silent truce between the two men. They weren't friends, perhaps they never would be, but they had found common ground, the desire to provide Emily with the stability and love she deserved. Sunday lunch at Walter's small house in Coral Gables was surprisingly pleasant. The place was modest, but clean and organized, revealing the genuine effort of a man trying to rebuild his life. Walter proved to be a competent cook, preparing a chili that Emily declared was almost as good as Grandma's. The mention of the grandmother, whom Richard didn't know had been an important part of Emily's life, opened space for stories from the past, shared with more laughter than tears. While Emily explored the small backyard behind the house, where Walter cultivated some herbs and vegetables, the two men had their first truly frank conversation. "I'm not trying to compete with you," said Walter, serving Richard coffee on the small porch. "I know I don't have that right after everything. But I want to be part of her life if she'll let me." "She needs you," replied Richard, surprising himself with the sincerity. "She needs to know where she came from, who her family is. She needs the stories that only you can tell. And she needs the stability that only you can offer right now," completed Walter, without bitterness. "I've seen how she looks at you. That's the same way she used to look at me when she was little, before I messed everything up." "You didn't mess everything up," said Richard, looking at Emily, who was now watering the plants under the guidance of Walter's elderly neighbor. "She's here, isn't she? Giving you a second chance." "Giving us both a chance," corrected Walter, with a half-smile. "You seem to need her as much as she needs you." The observation hit Richard with the force of a revelation. It was true. In just 1 month, Emily had brought more life and meaning to his existence than all the years of professional success. On the way back to Miami, Emily dozed in the back seat, exhausted but visibly content with the day. "I liked my dad's house," she commented sleepily. "It's small, but it has plants. Our apartment could have plants too." "We can arrange that," agreed Richard, smiling at her in the rearview mirror. "What kind of plants would you like?" "The ones that give flowers. Colorful ones. We'll buy some tomorrow." Emily's satisfied smile before completely falling asleep was all the thanks he needed. The following week, the routine was interrupted by a phone call in the middle of the night. It was from the hospital in Tampa. Jennifer had taken a significant turn for the worse and was asking to see her daughter. Ignoring the hour and the fatigue, Richard woke Emily gently, explained the situation in the gentlest way possible, and they quickly set out. During the night journey along the partially deserted highway, Emily remained silent, her face occasionally illuminated by the headlights of cars passing in the opposite direction, revealing an expression of determination beyond her years. The hospital at night had an even more melancholic air. The partially lit corridors, the silence broken only by the occasional beep of medical equipment, the smell of disinfectant more pronounced in the still air. Jennifer was in the same room, but the difference in her condition was evident. Her breathing was laborious, aided by an oxygen mask, and her cheeks, previously just thin, were now hollow. Upon seeing her daughter, however, her eyes lit up with the same intensity as always. She removed the mask for a moment, despite the nurse's protests. "My princess," she whispered, extending a trembling hand. "I'm so glad you came." Emily ran to hug her with more force than in previous visits, as if she could, through the hug, transfer her own vitality to her mother. "Everything will be okay, Mom," she said, with a conviction that made Richard's heart tighten. "You'll get better and then we'll live together again, you, me and Richard. He has a big apartment, there's room for everyone." Jennifer looked at Richard over her daughter's shoulder, a silent thank you in her deep eyes. "That would be nice, wouldn't it?" she replied, caressing Emily's hair. "But my love, sometimes things don't happen the way we want." "You'll get better," insisted Emily, pulling away to look into her mother's eyes. "I know you will. I pray for it every day." Jennifer smiled weakly, replacing the mask for a few moments to catch her breath. When she removed it again, her voice was even weaker. "Emily, I need you to be strong, as you've always been, stronger than any child should need to be." She paused, struggling to control her emotion. "If anything happens to me, I want you to know that I'm at peace knowing you have people who care for you. Your father is trying to get better, I know, and Richard—" She looked at him again. "Richard takes care of you as if you were his own." "You take care of me too," protested Emily, tears beginning to stream down her face. "You always have. Even when you were sick, even when there was nothing to eat, you shared with me. And I always will," assured Jennifer, drying her daughter's tears with fragile fingers. "One way or another, I promise." The visit lasted until dawn. Against all hospital rules, the medical team allowed Emily to remain by her mother's side, who eventually fell asleep with her daughter's hand in hers. Richard spent the entire time sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, a silent witness to that love which, despite all difficulties, remained unwavering. On the journey back, with the morning sun illuminating the road, Emily finally broke the silence. "She's not going to get better, is she?" she asked, her voice small but firm. Richard hesitated, torn between the desire to protect her and respect for her capacity for understanding. "The doctors are doing everything they can, Emily." "That doesn't answer my question," she observed with the same insight as always. "I saw it in her eyes, and in yours too." Richard took a deep breath. "No, Emily, the doctors don't believe she'll get better, but that doesn't mean we should lose hope. Miracles happen." Emily nodded, as if she already knew the answer before asking. "If she—" her voice failed for a moment. "If she goes away, can I continue living with you?" "Of course," replied Richard without hesitation. "For as long as you want. Forever, if that's what you wish." "And my father? Will he try to take me away from you?" The question caught Richard by surprise. "Why do you think that?" "Because that's what happens in soap operas," she replied, with simple logic. "Adults always fight over children, as if they were toys. Life isn't like soap operas, Emily. Your father and I, we talked. We want what's best for you." "And who decides what's best for me?" she asked, with a wisdom that went far beyond her 10 years. "You do," replied Richard after a moment of reflection. "With the help of the adults who care about you, of course. But in the end, your opinion is the most important." This conversation echoed in Richard's mind in the days that followed. The maturity with which Emily faced her mother's imminent loss was impressive and moving. She didn't cry, didn't rebel, just became more determined in her daily activities, as if each task completed, each lesson learned was a way to honor Jennifer. At school, her adaptation surprised the teachers. Despite the lost months, she showed herself eager for knowledge, participative in classes, and had already made some friends. The principal, Dr. Regina, had called Richard to talk about Emily's exceptional potential. She has a capacity for observation and analysis rare in children her age, explained the educator, and an admirable resilience considering everything she's been through. I strongly recommend that we consider psychopedagogical monitoring, not to remedy deficiencies, but to enhance these talents. Richard agreed immediately, happy to be able to provide Emily with all the opportunities that he himself didn't have in childhood. At home, the relationship between the two deepened each day. Richard, who had never imagined himself in the role of a father, was surprised by the naturalness with which he assumed the responsibilities, checking homework, imposing bedtimes, setting limits for television use, celebrating the small daily achievements, and most importantly, learning to listen, really listen to what Emily had to say. Some nights, when nightmares woke her up, more frequent since the last visit to her mother, he would sit on the edge of her bed, offering the silent comfort of his presence until she fell back asleep. On other occasions, it was she who noticed his moments of worry or fatigue, offering a glass of water or simply sitting next to him on the sofa, resting her head on his shoulder in a gesture of mute solidarity. Richard's corporate life, previously the center of his existence, had adjusted to this new reality. Marianne, his assistant, had become a fundamental ally, reorganizing his schedule to accommodate Emily's needs and occasionally offering advice based on her own experience as a mother of 2 teenagers. "I never imagined you would be such a dedicated father," she commented one afternoon as they organized the logistics for an important business trip that Richard would need to make. "She changed you. For the better, I hope," he replied with a smile that would have been unimaginable on his always serious face a few months ago. "Definitely for the better," confirmed Marianne. "The whole company has noticed. You're more human." The observation, made without malice, made Richard reflect on how his life had changed in such a short time. The man who once lived isolated in his glass tower, concerned only with spreadsheets and contracts, now discussed with the same intensity the school menu and the benefits of extracurricular activities. The change didn't go unnoticed by those who had known him longer. Sebastian, his driver for almost a decade, commented once while they waited for Emily to come out of ballet class, an activity she had chosen after watching a performance at school. "You smile more now, Mr. Miller. It's good to see that." Even Kyle, always pragmatic, had noticed the transformation. During a meeting to discuss the progress of the guardianship process, he observed, "You found your purpose, Richard. Some people spend their entire lives looking for that." In the middle of the 2nd month of this new life, the phone rang again in the middle of the night. It was the hospital. Richard answered on the first ring, already knowing what would come next. Jennifer had passed away. The news, as expected as it was, hit Richard like a punch. Not for the loss itself, he had barely known Jennifer, but for what it meant for Emily. How to tell a 10-year-old child that her mother, for whom she had waited and prayed, would not return. Sitting on the edge of the bed, watching Emily sleep peacefully, Richard faced the most difficult moment of his new journey as a guardian. Should he wake her now? Wait until morning? How to find the right words for news for which there were no right words? As he hesitated, Emily opened her eyes as if she had sensed his presence and his anguish. "It's Mom, isn't it?" she asked, her voice small in the dark room. Richard nodded, unable to speak. Emily sat up in bed, her eyes shining with contained tears. There were no screams, no denial, just a dense silence, loaded with a pain that words could not express. "Can I have a hug?" she asked finally. Richard opened his arms and Emily threw herself against his chest, finally allowing the tears to come. He held her firmly, feeling the sobs that shook the small body, murmuring words of comfort that he knew were inadequate, but were all he could offer. "She's not suffering anymore," whispered Emily between sobs. "That's what she would want me to think, right?" "Yes," agreed Richard, his own voice choked with emotion. "Your mother was very brave, and she wanted you to be happy above all." "I'll try," promised Emily, pulling away to look into his eyes. "For her, and for you too." At that moment, embraced in the dark room, the shared pain sealed between them a bond that no legal document could capture. They were no longer just guardian and ward, not even friends. They were family, united not by blood, but by something equally powerful, the mutual choice to belong to each other. The days that followed were of silent mourning. Walter, informed of the news, proved surprisingly sensitive and present. He attended the small funeral, organized by Richard with the dignity that Jennifer deserved, and stood by Emily's side throughout the ceremony, sharing stories about the better times they had lived together. "Your mother loved to dance," he told Emily, as they walked through the cemetery after the burial. "When we met, that's what she did. She danced at a bar in downtown Miami. That's how I fell in love with her. Not just for her beauty, but for the joy she had when she danced." Emily absorbed every detail, every story, like someone collecting precious treasures. "That's why I like to dance so much," she concluded thoughtfully. "I must have taken after her." "Definitely," agreed Walter with a sad smile. "You have a lot of her in you. The strength, the intelligence, even the way you furrow your brow when you're concentrating." Watching father and daughter walk together, sharing memories and discovering similarities, Richard felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was sadness for Jennifer's loss, relief at seeing Emily processing grief in a healthy way, and a subtle fear, almost irrational, that this reunion with her father might distance her from him. As if reading his thoughts, Emily turned and extended her hand to him, inviting him to join them in the walk. The three followed together along the stone path of the cemetery, an image that perfectly captured the complex dynamic they had established. Not a traditional family, but something equally valid, united by shared love for an extraordinary girl. Indai. The middle of the second month of this new life, Judge Vanderbilt's office seemed smaller than Richard remembered, or perhaps it was just the tension that made everything seem tighter, more suffocating. 3 months had passed since the first hearing, and now they were all gathered again for the final decision on Emily's guardianship. The girl sat between Richard and Walter, wearing a navy blue dress that she herself had chosen for the occasion. Her hair, now longer, was tied in an elaborate braid made by Mrs. Carla, who had become a constant and affectionate presence in her life. In recent months, Emily had regained the weight lost during her time on the streets, and her eyes, although still carrying the shadow of mourning for her mother, shone with a serenity they didn't possess before. Vera Lewis, the child welfare officer, was present with her usual notepad. Next to her, the social worker who had followed the case in recent weeks, conducting visits to both Richard's apartment and Walter's house to assess the conditions of each environment. Kyle, always impeccable in his grey suit, occasionally exchanged glances with the lawyer Walter had hired, an older man named Mr. Milton, known for his work in family law cases. The presence of the two lawyers might suggest a confrontational atmosphere, but the reality was quite different. In the weeks following Jennifer's death, something unexpected had happened. Instead of intensifying the dispute for Emily's guardianship, Richard and Walter had gradually developed a kind of partnership. They weren't close friends, perhaps they never would be, but they had found a balance that placed Emily's well-being above any personal consideration. Sundays at Walter's house had become part of the routine, as had Tuesdays, when he came to dinner at Richard's apartment. On special occasions, such as Emily's birthday celebrated discreetly 2 weeks after Jennifer's funeral, the two men put aside any remaining discomfort and united to provide the girl with moments of normality and joy. The judge entered the room, interrupting Richard's reflections. Everyone stood up in respect, and Emily instinctively sought his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Good morning, everyone," began Judge Vanderbilt, sitting down and indicating that the others should do the same. "We're here to define the situation of permanent guardianship for the minor Emily Wilson. Before announcing my decision, I would like to hear from the parties involved one last time." She looked directly at Emily. "And I'll start with you, Emily. In the last few months, many things have changed in your life. How do you feel now?" Emily straightened in her chair, her chin raised in a posture that mixed vulnerability and determination. "I'm well, Your Honor. I miss my mother every day, but—" She looked at Richard and then at Walter. "I have people who take care of me, and that helps." "And about your current situation? Living with Mr. Miller, visiting your father regularly, is that working for you?" "Yes," replied Emily with conviction. "I like living with Richard. He helps me with homework, takes me to school, taught me to swim in the building's pool, and I like spending Sundays with my father too. He tells me stories about my mother when she was young, teaches me to take care of plants, sometimes takes me fishing at the small lake near his house." The judge nodded, making some notes. "And if you had to choose to live permanently with one of them, who would you choose?" Emily frowned, visibly uncomfortable with the question. "Do I really have to choose? Can't I continue as it is?" The question, so direct and honest, brought a slight smile to Judge Vanderbilt's lips. "That's a possibility we're considering, Emily, but I need to understand how you would feel in each possible scenario." The girl was silent for a few moments, clearly thinking carefully. "If I had to choose, I would choose to continue living with Richard, but visiting my father always. I need both of them in my life." "Thank you for your honesty, Emily," said the judge, then turning to Richard. "Mr. Miller, in the last 3 months you've experienced what is, for all intents and purposes, full-time parenthood. How do you assess this experience?" Richard took a deep breath, seeking the right words. "Transformative, Your Honor. I won't lie and say it was easy. There were challenges, sleepless nights, moments of doubt. But there were also joys that I never imagined experiencing. Emily," he looked at the girl beside him, "Emily taught me to see the world in a different way, more complete, more human." "And what about your career? I know you run an important company. How have you reconciled these responsibilities?" "I adapted my routine," explained Richard. "I delegated more responsibilities, reorganized priorities. The company continues to prosper, perhaps even more than before, because now I have a more balanced perspective on what really matters." "Did he assume?" Judge nodded, apparently satisfied with the response, and turned to Walter. "Mr. Sanders, when we first met, you expressed the desire to obtain full custody of your daughter. Is that still your position?" Walter looked first at Emily, then at Richard, before answering. "No, Your Honor. In the last few months I've realized that the most important thing isn't where Emily lives, but that she has stability and happiness. She's happy and safe with Richard. He can offer opportunities that I never could. What I want now is just to continue being part of her life, to be the father I wasn't in recent years." The sincerity in Walter's voice was palpable, and Richard felt a new respect for the man who, despite all the difficulties and mistakes of the past, was genuinely committed to doing the best for his daughter, even if that meant giving up his own desires. Vera Lewis was the next to speak, presenting a detailed report of the home visits and interviews conducted with people close to Emily, teachers, neighbors, employees of the building where she lived with Richard. "Child Protective Services recognizes the exceptionality of this case," she concluded. "When we initially got involved, we had serious reservations about the informal arrangement established between Mr. Miller and Emily. However, what we observed in recent months was the development of a genuine and healthy bond, which has provided the child with the emotional and material stability she needs, especially after the loss of her mother." The lawyers had their turn, presenting technical and legal arguments that, surprisingly, converged to the same conclusion. The current situation, with permanent guardianship granted to Richard and broad visitation rights for Walter, seemed to be the most appropriate solution for the case. After hearing from all involved, the judge asked for a few minutes to review her notes. The silence that settled in the room was almost tangible. Emily, feeling the tension, reached for Richard's hand with one of her hands and Walter's with the other, creating a physical connection between the three that perfectly symbolized the dynamic they had built. When Judge Vanderbilt finally raised her eyes from her papers, her face was serene. "In my 20 years, on the bench," she began, "few cases have given me as much satisfaction as this one, not for the legal complexity, which is considerable, but for the way all parties involved have demonstrated a maturity and genuine concern for the child's well-being that unfortunately we don't always see in this room." She paused, looking directly at Emily. "Emily, The law exists to protect children like you. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions, even painful ones. But in this case, I have the privilege of being able to decide according to what you yourself expressed as your wish, because I sincerely believe it coincides with your best interest." Turning to Richard, the judge continued, "I grant Mr. Richard Miller permanent guardianship of the minor Emily Wilson, with all the rights and responsibilities that implies." She then looked at Walter. "To Mr. Walter Sanders, I grant broad and regular visitation rights according to the schedule already established during the temporary guardianship period, with the possibility of future revision to include alternate weekends and vacation periods by agreement between the parties." Emily let out a small sigh of relief, squeezing more tightly the hands she was holding. "Additionally," continued the judge, "I strongly recommend that both continue the pattern of cooperation they have demonstrated in recent months. Emily has the right to enjoy the presence of both in her life, and you have demonstrated admirable ability to place her well-being above any personal differences." The formalization of the decision involved signing various documents, bureaucratic procedures that seemed secondary given the emotional importance of the moment. When they finally left the courthouse, Emily walked between Richard and Walter, an expression of contentment on her face that neither had seen since before Jennifer's passing. "Can we get ice cream to celebrate?" she asked with the spontaneity typical of her age, reminding everyone that despite all the maturity she demonstrated, she was still a child. "Of course," replied Richard, smiling. "But no chocolate before lunch," added Walter, naturally assuming his paternal role. "Your mother always said it ruined your appetite." Emily rolled her eyes theatrically. "You two are getting very similar, you know. Always worried about what I eat, when I go to bed, with my homework." The observation made the two men exchange a look of surprise, followed by reluctant smiles. There was truth in what Emily said. Gradually, almost without realizing it, they had developed a co-parenting dynamic that, although unconventional, worked surprisingly well. The ice cream was just the beginning of the celebrations. That night, Walter joined them for dinner at Richard's apartment. Mrs. Carla had prepared a complete feast, Emily's favorite meal, and had also invited Sebastian and Marianne, who had become important figures in the new family configuration that was forming. During dinner, Emily, animated and talkative as she rarely was, told everyone about her school science project, which had received the highest grade, and about the ballet presentation that was approaching, for which she had been rehearsing for weeks. "You'll all come to watch, right?" she asked, looking around the table. "It'll be at the school theater next Saturday." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," guaranteed Walter. "I'll be in the front row," promised Richard. "And I'll bring my new camera to film everything," added Marianne, who had become a kind of honorary aunt to Emily. It was a common domestic scene, the kind of moment that happens in thousands of homes every night. But for Richard, who until a few months ago dined alone in silent restaurants, there was something deeply extraordinary in the normality of that moment. Watching Emily laugh at a joke from Sebastian, he remembered the night when it all began, at the High Tide restaurant. "Can I have some?" she had asked with that determined voice that hid so much fear and so much hope. Her simple request that had changed everything. After dinner, while Emily showed Walter and the others the new aquarium that Richard had installed in her room, Kyle pulled his friend to a corner of the balcony. "Everything okay?" asked the lawyer, noticing Richard's contemplative expression. "Better than ever," he replied sincerely. "I was just thinking about how life takes turns. 4 months ago, I was another person." "A lonelier person," observed Kyle. "An incomplete person," corrected Richard. "I just didn't know it." The lawyer smiled, looking inside the apartment, where Emily was now animatedly explaining the names she had given to each fish in the aquarium. "You know what impresses me most about this whole story? It's not that you changed for her. It's that you allowed her to show you who you really were beneath that facade of the reserved executive." The observation hit Richard with the force of a truth long intuited, but never fully articulated. That was exactly it. Emily hadn't transformed him into another person. She had simply revealed facets of his personality that were dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The following months brought new adjustments and challenges. Emily's official entry into the Miller family required legal adaptations, such as including her in the health insurance, updating school documents, opening her savings account for her future. Practical details that, although bureaucratic, conferred solidity and permanence to the new arrangement. In the apartment, the once aseptic and impersonal space continued its gradual transformation. Emily's room now sported an entire wall of photos, some old rescued from Jennifer's belongings in Tampa, others new recording moments of current life. There were images of her with Richard at the beach, with Walter in his small fishing boat, with her new school friends, with Mrs. Carla learning to make brigadeiros. The balcony, previously empty except for two rarely used chairs, now housed a small garden, the result of frequent visits to Walter's house. Emily had developed the interest in plants inherited from her father, and Richard had discovered that he enjoyed the ritual of watering the ferns and orchids that now embellished the space. At Militech, the change in Richard was noticed by everyone. The once rigorous and distant boss now demonstrated an empathy and flexibility that made the work environment lighter and more productive. Meetings that previously extended late into the night were now concluded at reasonable hours, with decisions just as or more efficient. The balance he had found in his personal life was reflected positively in his professional performance. In Coral Gables, Walter was also experiencing significant changes. The responsibility of being a present father for Emily had given new purpose to his life. He had enrolled in a night technical course to improve his professional skills and regularly attended school meetings, always in coordination with Richard, to ensure that at least one of them was present at each important event. Relationship between the two men, initially tense and then pragmatic, had evolved into something close to friendship, not a conventional friendship based on common interests or personality affinities, but a genuine connection founded on mutual respect and shared love for Emily. "I never imagined that one day I would be thanking the man who stole my daughter," commented Walter once, as the two watched Emily swimming in the pool of Richard's building. "I never imagined that I would be sharing the raising of a daughter with a man I barely knew 4 months ago," replied Richard, with a half-smile. "Life has these things," philosophized Walter. "As that Bruce Springsteen song says, you can't start a fire without a spark." The observation drew a genuine laugh from Richard, one of those laughs that were becoming increasingly frequent in his life. The definitive turning point came on an ordinary afternoon, about 6 months after the beginning of the whole story. Richard had picked up Emily from school, and as they occasionally did, they stopped for acai at the square near the building. Sitting on a bench, watching the pigeons and the people passing by, they talked about her school day. "I had to write an essay today," Emily told, licking the acai spoon. "About family." "And what did you write?" asked Richard, interested. "That family isn't just who has the same blood, it's who chooses to stay together, even when it's difficult." She paused, looking at him with those intense eyes that always seemed to see beyond the surface. "I wrote about you, about my father, about my mother who now takes care of me from another place, about Mrs. Carla, Sebastian, Marianne, about how all of you are my family now." Richard felt a lump in his throat. "And did the teacher like it?" "Very much. She said I'm going to read it to the whole school at the next assembly." Emily smiled, proud. "And she also said that I'm lucky, that not all children who go through difficult things find people who love them like this." "The luck wasn't just yours," said Richard, holding her small hand. "It was mine too." "Ours," corrected Emily. "It was our luck." In that simple moment, sitting on a park bench with acai melting in the cups, Richard fully understood the miracle that had happened in his life. He who had always calculated each step, who had never left room for the unexpected, had received the greatest gift exactly when he least expected it, exactly when he wasn't looking for it. Weeks later, the video that had started it all, Emily approaching Richard's table at the restaurant, resurfaced on the internet, this time accompanied by an update. A national television program had produced a special report on their story, interviewing not only Richard and Emily, but also Walter, the school teachers, and even Anthony, the waiter who had tried to prevent the girl's approach on that fateful night. For the first time, Richard had agreed to speak publicly about the experience, not out of vanity or search for recognition, but because Emily had insisted that their story could help other children in similar situations. The program aired on Sunday night, and they watched it together, gathered in the apartment's living room: Richard, Emily, Walter, Mrs. Carla, Kyle and his wife, Marianne and her family, Sebastian. An extended, unconventional family, united by bonds as strong as or stronger than those of blood. At the end of the report, when the presenter asked Emily what the whole experience had meant to her, the girl looked directly at the camera and said with the simplicity and depth that characterized her, "I only asked for a little, but he gave me everything." The phrase crossed the studio, crossed the screens of millions of televisions across America, crossed hearts. Silence. The broadcast ended with tears in the air and intense emotions in thousands of homes across the country. That night, after all the guests had left and Emily was already sleeping, Richard stood on the balcony of his apartment, contemplating the city that never slept. The lights of Miami shone against the dark sky, reflecting in the ocean waters. Somewhere down there, in the middle of that sea of lights, there was a restaurant where a frail girl had approached his table and made a simple request, forever changing the course of 2 lives. "Can I have some?" He had given everything and received much more in return.